Kate Morrison had always been fascinated by old things. Antique shops, vintage clothing stores, and estate sales drew her like a magnet. At 28, she worked as a graphic designer in downtown Portland, but her weekends belonged to treasure hunting through dusty corners of forgotten shops. On a particularly gray Saturday morning in October, Kate discovered a small antique store she had never noticed before. The shop sat wedged between a coffee house and a bookstore on Hawthorne Boulevard, its weathered sign reading, "Memories and More." The windows were so grimy that she could barely see inside, but something about the place called to her. A tiny bell chimed as she pushed open the heavy wooden door. The smell of old wood, musty fabric, and something she couldn't quite identify filled her nostrils. The shop was cramped and dark, with narrow aisles winding between towering shelves of china, furniture, and countless forgotten objects. An elderly man emerged from the shadows behind the counter. He was thin and pale, with wispy white hair and eyes so light blue they seemed almost colorless. His clothes looked like they belonged to another era entirely. "Welcome, my dear," he said in a voice that reminded Kate of rustling leaves. "I'm Mr. Ashford. Please look around. Sometimes the right piece finds you, rather than the other way around." Kate smiled politely and began browsing. She ran her fingers along vintage jewelry boxes, examined old photographs in tarnished silver frames, and admired a collection of porcelain dolls that seemed to watch her every movement. The deeper she ventured into the shop, the more cluttered it became. In the very back corner, partially hidden behind a stack of leather-bound books, she spotted something that made her heart skip. It was a portrait in an ornate golden frame, about 2 feet tall and 1.5 feet wide. The painting depicted a young woman who looked remarkably similar to Kate herself. The woman in the portrait had the same auburn hair, the same heart-shaped face, even the same small scar above her left eyebrow that Kate had gotten falling off her bicycle as a child. The resemblance was so striking that for a moment, Kate wondered if someone had played an elaborate joke on her. But as she looked closer, she noticed differences. The woman's clothing was clearly from another time period, perhaps the 1920s or 1930s. She wore a deep blue dress with intricate beadwork, and her hair was styled in finger waves that framed her face perfectly. Most notably, her eyes held an expression that Kate found both mesmerizing and unsettling. They seemed older somehow, filled with knowledge and sadness that didn't match the woman's youthful appearance. "Ah, I see you've found Eleanor." Mr. Ashford's voice startled Kate. She hadn't heard him approach. "Eleanor?" Kate asked, unable to take her eyes off the portrait. "Eleanor Whitmore. The painting is from 1934. She was a lovely young woman, though her story is rather tragic." Mr. Ashford adjusted his wire-rimmed spectacles and gazed at the portrait with what appeared to be genuine fondness. "She looks so much like me," Kate whispered, almost to herself. "Yes, I noticed that immediately when you walked in. Quite remarkable, really. Family resemblance, perhaps?" Kate shook her head. "I don't think so. My family came from Ireland originally, and we don't have any records going back that far in America." Mr. Ashford nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes these things are just coincidence, or perhaps not coincidence at all, depending on what you believe." Something in his tone made Kate look at him more carefully. His pale eyes seemed to hold secrets, and his slight smile was difficult to read. "What happened to her? Eleanor, I mean." "She disappeared one autumn evening in 1934, simply vanished without a trace. Some say she ran away with a lover, others believed something more sinister occurred. The truth was never discovered." Mr. Ashford paused, running a gnarled finger along the frame. "This portrait was commissioned by her husband just months before she disappeared. He was heartbroken, naturally." Kate found herself drawn deeper into the painting. Eleanor's eyes seemed to follow her as she moved, and she could swear she saw something flicker in their depths. It was probably just a trick of the dim lighting, but the effect was unnerving. "How much are you asking for it?" Kate heard herself say, surprised by her own words. She hadn't planned to buy anything, especially not something as large and expensive as an original portrait. "For you, my dear, I think 500 would be fair. It's been waiting here for quite some time, and I believe it belongs with someone who appreciates its uniqueness." $500 was more than Kate typically spent on anything outside of rent and groceries, but she found herself nodding. Something about the portrait called to her in a way she couldn't explain. Maybe it was the uncanny resemblance, or maybe it was the mystery surrounding Eleanor's disappearance, but she knew she had to have it. Mr. Ashford helped her carry the portrait to her car, wrapping it carefully in old blankets. As she drove home, Kate kept glancing in her rearview mirror at the painting secured in her back seat. Even covered and turned away from her, she felt as though Eleanor was somehow still watching. Kate lived in a small apartment above a bakery in the Alberta Arts District. The space was cozy but modern, filled with her own artwork and contemporary furniture. She spent the rest of Saturday afternoon trying to decide where to hang Eleanor's portrait. Finally, she settled on the wall opposite her bed in the bedroom. The morning light from her east-facing window would illuminate it perfectly, and it would be the first thing she saw when she woke up each day. As she hammered the nail into the wall and carefully hung the portrait, Kate felt a strange sense of completion, as if a missing piece of her life had finally fallen into place. Eleanor seemed to approve of the location, her painted eyes gazing serenely across the room. That night, Kate found it difficult to fall asleep. Every time she looked toward the portrait, Eleanor seemed to be looking back. The woman's expression appeared to shift subtly in the changing shadows cast by the streetlight outside Kate's window. Sometimes Eleanor looked peaceful, other times melancholy, and occasionally Kate could swear she looked almost alive. Kate finally drifted off around 2 in the morning, but her sleep was restless and filled with strange dreams. She dreamed of dancing in a grand ballroom, wearing the same blue beaded dress as Eleanor. In the dream, people kept asking her questions she couldn't understand, and when she tried to speak, no words would come. She woke abruptly at dawn, disoriented and with a lingering sense that something had changed during the night. Blinking in the early morning light, Kate looked automatically toward Eleanor's portrait and gasped. The woman in the painting was no longer looking straight ahead as she had been the day before. Eleanor's painted gaze was now directed toward Kate's bed, and her expression had shifted. Where before there had been serene melancholy, now there was something that looked almost like recognition. Kate rubbed her eyes and looked again, certain she must still be half asleep. But no. Eleanor was definitely facing a different direction than she had been when Kate hung the portrait. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Feeling foolish but unable to shake her unease, Kate got up and examined the portrait more closely. The brushstrokes looked exactly as they had yesterday, and there were no signs that anyone had tampered with the painting. Yet she was absolutely certain that Eleanor's position had changed. Kate dressed quickly and made coffee, trying to rationalize what she had seen. Perhaps she had been more tired than she realized when she hung the portrait, and had simply misremembered which direction Eleanor was facing. Or maybe the morning light was playing tricks on her eyes. But deep down, Kate knew something impossible had happened. And as she glanced back at the portrait while getting ready for work, she could have sworn she saw Eleanor's lips curve into the faintest suggestion of a smile. The feeling of being watched followed Kate throughout her Monday at the office. She found herself distracted during meetings, her mind returning again and again to Eleanor's portrait. Her colleagues noticed her preoccupation, but Kate couldn't very well explain that she thought a painting had moved during the night. By the time she got home that evening, Kate had almost convinced herself that the whole thing had been her imagination. She had always been creative and prone to flights of fancy. Surely that was all this was. But when she walked into her bedroom and looked at the portrait, her heart nearly stopped. Eleanor was no longer facing toward the bed. Now she appeared to be looking directly at the bedroom door, as if she had been watching and waiting for Kate to return. Kate sank onto her bed, staring at the portrait in shock. This time there was no question, no room for doubt or rationalization. Eleanor's position had changed again, and there was no logical explanation for how it could have happened. As she sat there trying to process what she was seeing, Kate noticed something else that made her blood run cold. Eleanor's eyes, which had seemed sad but peaceful in the antique shop, now held an intensity that was almost desperate. They seemed to be pleading with Kate, trying to communicate something urgent, and for the first time since bringing the portrait home, Kate began to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. Kate barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt Eleanor watching her. When she finally managed to doze off, she was jolted awake by the sound of someone calling her name, but when she sat up and looked around her empty apartment, there was nothing but silence and the soft glow of the streetlight filtering through her curtains. The portrait remained unchanged throughout the night, Eleanor still gazing toward the door with those increasingly unsettling eyes. But Kate noticed something new in the morning light. The painting seemed somehow more vivid than before, as if the colors had deepened overnight. Eleanor's skin looked warmer, more lifelike, and her auburn hair seemed to catch and reflect the sunlight streaming through the window. Kate called in sick to work, unable to concentrate on anything but the mystery of Eleanor's portrait. She spent the morning researching Eleanor Whitmore online, but found very little information. There were a few brief newspaper articles from 1934 mentioning her disappearance, but most of the details matched what Mr. Ashford had already told her. According to the Portland Tribune archives, Eleanor had been married to a wealthy businessman named Charles Whitmore. She had vanished on the evening of October 15, 1934, after telling her housekeeper she was going for a walk in the garden. When Charles returned from a business trip the following morning, Eleanor was nowhere to be found. Despite an extensive search and investigation, no trace of her was ever discovered. The more Kate read, the more troubled she became. Today was October 15th, exactly 91 years to the day after Eleanor's disappearance. The coincidence felt too strange to be random. That afternoon, Kate decided to return to Memories and More to speak with Mr. Ashford. She had questions about the portrait's history, and she hoped he might be able to explain what was happening. But when she arrived at the location where the shop had been, she found only an empty storefront with "For Lease" signs in the windows. Confused and increasingly anxious, Kate asked at the coffee shop next door about the antique store. The young barista looked at her strangely. "There hasn't been an antique shop there for years," he said. "That space has been empty since I started working here 18 months ago." Kate's heart raced. She described Mr. Ashford and the cluttered shop filled with vintage items, but the barista shook his head. "I think you must be thinking of somewhere else. Maybe one of the shops on Division Street?" But Kate knew she wasn't mistaken. She had the receipt in her purse, written in elegant script on aged paper that read, "Memories and More, Purveyors of the Past." When she showed it to the barista, his eyes widened. "That's really weird," he admitted. "I've never seen anything like this. The paper looks ancient." Kate spent the rest of the afternoon driving to every antique shop in Portland, showing Eleanor's receipt and describing Mr. Ashford. No one had heard of him or his shop. By evening, she was forced to accept that somehow, impossibly, she had bought a portrait from a store that didn't exist. When she returned home, Kate found Eleanor's portrait exactly as she had left it. But as the sun set and shadows began to fill the room, something extraordinary began to happen. Eleanor's eyes, which had been painted in shades of brown and gold, slowly started to change color. Kate watched in fascination and growing terror as they shifted to a brilliant green, then to blue, and finally to a deep violet that seemed to glow with its own inner light. At exactly midnight, Eleanor spoke. "Kate," she said, her voice soft and melodic, with a slight accent that Kate couldn't place. "Please don't be frightened. I need your help." Kate stumbled backward, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there staring at a painting that had somehow come to life. But Eleanor's expression was so gentle, so desperate, that Kate found herself rooted in place. "This isn't possible," Kate whispered. "I know how it must seem," Eleanor said, her painted lips moving naturally as she spoke. "But I assure you, I am as real as you are. I've been trapped in this portrait for nearly a century, waiting for someone who could see me, who could help me find peace." "Trapped? I don't understand." Eleanor's expression grew sad. "It's a long and terrible story. My husband Charles was not the man he appeared to be. He was involved in dark practices, obsessed with the occult and the idea of preserving beauty forever. When I discovered his secrets and threatened to expose him, he used his knowledge to bind my soul to this portrait." Kate sank into her desk chair, struggling to process what she was hearing. "But you disappeared. The newspaper said you went for a walk and never came back." "Charles killed me that night in our garden," Eleanor said simply. "He buried my body somewhere on the property and told everyone I had run away. Then he commissioned this portrait using my blood mixed with the paint, trapping me between worlds. I've been conscious all these years, aware but unable to act, unable to move on." The room felt ice cold despite the warm October evening. Kate wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop shaking. "Why me? Why can you speak to me when you couldn't speak to anyone else?" Eleanor's violet eyes seemed to glow brighter. "You and I are connected in ways I don't fully understand. Perhaps we're related somehow despite what you believe about your family history. Or perhaps it's simply that you were meant to find me on this day, the anniversary of my death, when the veil between worlds is thinnest. What do you want from me? I need you to help me find justice. Charles is long dead, but his descendants still live in the house where he killed me. My body was never found, never properly laid to rest. Without that, I cannot move on to whatever comes after this existence." Kate stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "This is insane. I'm talking to a painting. People don't get trapped in portraits, and the dead don't come back to ask for help." "Look at me, Kate," Eleanor said gently. Against her better judgment, Kate turned to face the portrait. Eleanor had stepped out of the ornate frame and was now standing in Kate's bedroom, as solid and real as any living person. She still wore the blue-beaded dress from the painting. But now Kate could see it was even more beautiful than it had appeared in oils. The beadwork caught the light like tiny stars, and the fabric moved naturally as Eleanor breathed. "I know it's difficult to accept," Eleanor said, taking a cautious step toward Kate. "But you've already seen that I can move within the portrait. This is simply the next step. On this night, the anniversary of my death, I have enough power to manifest physically for a few hours." Kate reached out tentatively and was shocked when her fingers made contact with Eleanor's hand. It was cool but undeniably real, solid flesh and bone. "My God," Kate breathed. "You're really here." Eleanor nodded, "But not for long. As the night ends, I'll be pulled back into the portrait, and I may not be able to manifest again for another year, if ever. Please, Kate. I'm begging you. Help me find peace." Kate looked into Eleanor's eyes and saw 91 years of suffering, of being trapped and helpless while the world moved on without her. Despite every rational thought screaming that this was impossible, Kate found herself nodding. "What do you need me to do?" Eleanor's face lit up with hope and gratitude. "The Whitmore house still stands in the West Hills. It's been in Charles's family all these years, though it's changed hands several times. I need you to take me there so I can show you where my body is buried. Only then can I be properly laid to rest." Kate glanced at the clock. It was already past midnight, and she had no idea how much time they had. "We should go now," she said, grabbing her car keys, "before you have to go back to the portrait." As they left the apartment together, Kate caught their reflection in her hallway mirror and gasped. She could see herself clearly, but Eleanor appeared only as a faint, translucent outline. In the mirror, it looked like Kate was walking alone, talking to empty air. "Others won't be able to see me," Eleanor explained, noticing Kate's shock. "To everyone else, I exist only as a painting. But you'll be able to see and hear me as long as I have the strength to maintain this form." They drove through the empty Portland streets in Kate's Honda Civic, Eleanor giving directions to the house that had once been her home and the place of her murder. The West Hills neighborhood was exactly the kind of area where a wealthy businessman from the 1930s would have lived, large lots with sprawling houses hidden behind tall trees and elaborate gates. "Turn here," Eleanor said softly as they approached a narrow driveway marked by stone pillars. "It hasn't changed much, though the garden is different now." The Whitmore house loomed ahead of them, a massive Tudor-style mansion that looked like something from a Gothic novel. Most of the windows were dark, but a few glowed with warm yellow light. Someone was definitely home. "Are you sure about this?" Kate asked as she parked at the end of the long driveway. "What if whoever lives there now calls the police?" Eleanor's form was already beginning to look more translucent, and her voice sounded fainter than before. "We don't have much time. My body is buried beneath the old oak tree behind the house. If you can just find it. If you can call the authorities and have my remains properly identified and buried, I believe I'll finally be free." As they approached the back garden, Kate felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October night air. The massive oak tree Eleanor had mentioned stood alone in the center of what had once been an elaborate formal garden, but was now somewhat overgrown. Even in the darkness, Kate could see that the ground beneath the tree was slightly sunken, as if the earth had settled over something buried long ago. Eleanor, now barely visible even to Kate, pointed to a spot near the tree's base. "There," she whispered. "Charles buried me there on the night he killed me, then planted new flowers over the grave to hide the disturbed earth." Kate knelt beside the tree, running her hands over the soft ground. It felt different somehow, less firm than the surrounding soil. As her fingers explored the area, they encountered something hard and smooth just beneath the surface. With growing excitement and dread, Kate began to dig with her bare hands. Within minutes, she had uncovered what appeared to be a piece of old fabric, then something that made her heart race, a small, tarnished piece of jewelry that matched the necklace Eleanor wore in the portrait. "You found it." Eleanor's voice was now just a whisper on the wind. "You found me." Kate looked up to see Eleanor's spirit beginning to fade, her form becoming more and more transparent as the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon. "Wait!" Kate called out. "What happens now?" But Eleanor was already disappearing, her final words carried on the morning breeze. "Thank you, Kate. You've given me the greatest gift of all. Now I can finally rest." As the sun rose over Portland, Kate found herself alone in the Whitmore garden, kneeling beside a shallow grave she had uncovered with her own hands, holding evidence of a 91-year-old murder. Kate sat in the Whitmore garden as the sun climbed higher, staring at the evidence in her hands and trying to figure out what to do next. She couldn't very well call the police and explain that a ghost had led her to a decades-old murder scene, but she also couldn't simply walk away and leave Eleanor's remains unmarked and unremembered. The sound of a door opening behind her made Kate's heart race. She turned to see an elderly woman in a bathrobe standing on the back porch of the house, looking concerned and confused. "Excuse me," the woman called out. "Can I help you? Are you all right?" Kate stood up quickly. brushing dirt from her knees and trying to think of an explanation that wouldn't sound completely insane. "I'm so sorry to disturb you," Kate began, walking toward the woman. "My name is Kate Morrison. I'm a researcher working on local history, and I have reason to believe there might be historical significance to this area of your property." The woman, who appeared to be in her 70s with silver hair and kind eyes, looked puzzled, but not frightened. "Historical significance? This house has been in my husband's family since the 1930s. I'm Margaret Whitmore, by the way." Kate's blood ran cold. Whitmore. She was talking to Charles Whitmore's descendant. "Whitmore," Kate repeated slowly. "Would you happen to know anything about Eleanor Whitmore? She lived here in the 1930s. Margaret's expression changed immediately, a shadow of sadness crossing her features. "Eleanor was my husband's great-aunt. She disappeared before he was born, but the family always spoke of her. Such a tragic story. Why are you asking about her?" Kate took a deep breath and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Mrs. Whitmore, I think I may have found something that belongs to her." She held out the tarnished necklace she had discovered in the soil. Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Oh, my goodness," Margaret whispered. "I've seen that necklace in old family photographs. Eleanor was wearing it in her wedding picture. Where did you find it?" "Buried under your oak tree," Kate said gently. "Mrs. Whitmore, I believe Eleanor never ran away like everyone thought. I think she's been here all along." The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls and careful explanations. Margaret Whitmore proved to be remarkably open-minded about Kate's discovery, perhaps because she had always felt something wasn't right about the family story of Eleanor's disappearance. When the police arrived, followed by the medical examiner and an archaeologist from Portland State University, they found exactly what Kate had suspected. Buried beneath the oak tree were the remains of a young woman, along with scraps of a blue beaded dress and several pieces of jewelry that matched items Eleanor had been wearing when she vanished. The investigation that followed was thorough but respectful. Forensic analysis confirmed that the remains were those of a woman in her 20s who had died sometime in the 1930s. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the skull, ruling out any possibility that Eleanor had simply died of natural causes and been buried in the garden. Most remarkably, when investigators searched the house's basement, they found Charles Whitmore's private study, exactly as he had left it when he died in 1962. Hidden behind a false wall were journals detailing his obsession with the occult, his experiments with what he called soul binding, and most damning of all, his detailed confession of Eleanor's murder. Charles had indeed killed his wife when she threatened to expose his activities to the police. His journals revealed a man consumed by the belief that he could achieve immortality by trapping souls in physical objects. Eleanor had been his most ambitious experiment, and according to his own words, his only successful one. The story made national news. "Decades-old murder solved by amateur historian" read the headlines, though Kate never revealed the true circumstances of her discovery. She simply told reporters that she had been researching the Whitmore family history and had noticed discrepancies in the official story of Eleanor's disappearance. Margaret Whitmore became Kate's strongest ally in seeking justice for Eleanor. Despite learning that her husband's great-uncle had been a murderer, she felt only relief that the family's darkest secret had finally come to light. "I always felt something was wrong in this house," Margaret told Kate during one of their many conversations. "There were cold spots in certain rooms, and sometimes I could swear I heard a woman crying late at night. My husband's father used to mention strange dreams about a lady in blue. Now I understand why." Eleanor's remains were given a proper burial in Portland's Lone Fir Cemetery, with Margaret Whitmore paying for a beautiful headstone that read, "Eleanor Whitmore, 1910-1934, finally at peace." Kate attended the small ceremony, along with Margaret and a few other distant family members who had always wondered about Eleanor's fate. But the most remarkable changes occurred in Kate's apartment. The morning after Eleanor's burial, Kate returned home to find the portrait completely transformed. Eleanor still gazed out from the ornate frame, but her expression was entirely different. Gone was the desperate intensity, the ancient sadness that had made her eyes so disturbing. Instead, Eleanor looked peaceful and serene, with a gentle smile that seemed to convey gratitude and farewell. More importantly, Eleanor never moved again. The portrait remained exactly as Kate positioned it, never shifting position or changing expression. Whatever supernatural force had animated the painting was gone, leaving behind only a beautiful work of art and the memory of an extraordinary encounter. Kate kept the portrait, but she moved it to her living room where it wouldn't watch her sleep. Sometimes, when the afternoon light hit it just right, she could swear Eleanor's smile looked a little brighter, as if she approved of her new resting place. The receipt from Memories and More remained a mystery that Kate never solved. She kept it in a frame next to Eleanor's portrait as a reminder that some things in life couldn't be explained by logic alone. Occasionally, she would drive past the empty storefront where the antique shop had appeared, but it remained vacant, with no sign that Mr. Ashford or his collection of mysterious objects had ever existed. Margaret Whitmore invited Kate to visit the family house several times, and Kate was amazed by how different it felt. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the property for decades was completely gone. Margaret reported that the cold spots had disappeared, the strange sounds had stopped, and for the first time in her 40 years of living there, the house felt truly peaceful. "It's like Eleanor was waiting all these years for someone to tell her story," Margaret said during one of Kate's visits. "Now that the truth is known, she can finally rest." Kate's life gradually returned to normal, though she found herself changed by the experience. She had always been interested in history, but now she felt a deeper connection to the past and the people whose stories had been lost or forgotten. She began volunteering at local historical societies, helping to research families and missing persons cases. She also developed a reputation as someone who could help solve old mysteries, though she never again encountered anything as supernatural as Eleanor's portrait. Still, her experience taught her to be more open to possibilities beyond conventional understanding, and she approached each new historical puzzle with the knowledge that truth was often stranger than fiction. The portrait of Eleanor Whitmore became something of a local legend. Margaret Whitmore had donated Charles's confession and journals to the Portland Historical Society, where they became part of an exhibit about unsolved crimes that were eventually solved through modern investigation techniques. Kate was invited to speak about her discovery several times, always carefully omitting the supernatural elements of her story. One evening, about 6 months after Eleanor's burial, Kate was working late in her apartment when she noticed something that made her smile. The portrait was illuminated by the warm glow of her desk lamp, and Eleanor's painted face seemed more lifelike than usual. For just a moment, Kate could have sworn she saw Eleanor mouth the words, "Thank you," before the illusion faded. Whether it was her imagination, a trick of the light, or one final message from beyond, Kate chose to believe it was Eleanor's way of saying goodbye. She whispered, "You're welcome," to the portrait and returned to her work, feeling a sense of peace and completion that she carried with her for the rest of her life. Years later, when people asked Kate about her most interesting antique find, she would smile and tell them about the portrait of a woman whose eyes seemed to belong to someone else. She would describe the mystery of Eleanor's disappearance and the satisfaction of finally bringing her story to light. But she never mentioned the supernatural elements of her experience, knowing that some truths were too extraordinary for most people to accept. The portrait remained in Kate's possession for the rest of her life, a beautiful reminder that sometimes the past reaches out to touch the present in ways that defy explanation. And sometimes, when Kate had visitors who admired the painting, she would notice them commenting on Eleanor's remarkable eyes and the way they seemed to follow you around the room. Kate would just smile and nod, knowing that Eleanor's spirit might be at peace, but her presence lived on in the stunning portrait that had brought them together across nearly a century of separation. In helping Eleanor find justice, Kate had discovered that love, determination, and the human desire for truth could transcend even death itself. The empty storefront where Memories and More had appeared was eventually rented by a small bookshop. But Kate never forgot the mysterious Mr. Ashford, who had somehow known she was meant to find Eleanor's portrait. She often wondered if he had been real at all, or if he was simply another part of the supernatural forces that had conspired to bring Eleanor's story to light after so many years of silence. In the end, it didn't matter whether Mr. Ashford was human, ghost, or something else entirely. What mattered was that Eleanor Whitmore's long ordeal was over, her murderer's crimes were finally exposed, and justice had been served, even if it took 91 years to arrive. Kate kept Eleanor's story alive by sharing it with historians, journalists, and anyone else who would listen. She wanted to ensure that Eleanor would be remembered not just as a victim, but as a young woman who had fought for truth and justice even from beyond the grave. And whenever Kate looked at the portrait's peaceful expression, she knew that Eleanor's legacy would live on long after both of them had passed into history.